Hey guys, welcome to the first episode of session one. Today we're going to talk about mental health, something that both Rowan and I have experienced firsthand. And we just want to be real with you and share our stories.
Yeah, so mental health, obviously right now it's such a big deal. It's actually the leading cause of death for people aged 25 to 45 in Australia. And it's probably something that you may have experience with or have known loved ones or extended family members or people outside of your network to have poor mental health. So it's really important that we discuss it today.
While reading the stats about mental health and men's mental health, it really shocked me, to be honest. I knew it was like a big deal, but to see it was like the first cause of death between 25 to 44/45. Like I was really shocked, and the fact that I think it's something around like 40% of men with mental health don't seek professional help at all due to the stigma associated with it. So yeah, I'm really happy that we're talking about it today because I think it's a super important topic.
Cool. Basically, the first experience of me come to terms with kind of, I would say, a form of depression was when I was at university. I was studying media and music. I was working in a hospital. I was pretty isolated. I would go to uni every day, be focused on my studies. Then I would drive my car, work in the hospital by myself and with one other person and deliver linen around the hospital. What I noticed is I actually tended to start isolating in my room, spending more time on the internet, making a lot of music by myself, but actually not reaching out to my friends. And I think that lack of social isolation it actually allowed me to kind of get really up in my head. And I didn't know it at the time, but I started to feel really lethargic and I didn't feel good inside myself. I started to feel really down and low. I didn't want to go outside. I didn't actually want to be with my friends. They'd be telling me, why don't we go out here and do this? And I just thought, like, what's the point, right? So that lasted for about 3 to 4 months. I would just isolate in my room. And then cut probably 5 or 6 years later when I went on a trip to Europe and I was, abusing alcohol and cigarettes and I wasn't treating my body well. I came home and just the sadness and that post-travel depression, I really started to become more mentally unwell and eventually ended up actually attempting suicide by taking about 28 Panadols, 4 sleeping pills. And I had a psychologist at the time, but I just remember feeling like I didn't want anyone else to know how I was feeling. I was really like guarded about that. I ended up getting help through the hospital, going into a facility for 4 days, and then I spent a week in a private mental health hospital, and I got really great support from psychiatrists and psychologists, did the group therapy program, came out and started rebuilding. But I remember it was a really scary time and not being able to actually trust your mind. And it almost felt like my mind was turning on myself. It felt like I actually wasn't in control of my mind anymore. It was in control of me. And that's really frightening. That's a really, really frightening thing to think about.
So what age were you when you had this, I guess you described 2 different events, right? One being a period of isolation, and then the second event being you've gone to Europe, you started abusing alcohol and your body. How old were you in that experience when the second experience?
Second experience, I was 25.
25. Okay. And so what happened? I mean, you said that you attempted to take your life. What was the kind of the trigger point here? Why did you go down that path, do you think?
I think it was such a high from traveling. And then also my body, I was really just kind of physically unwell. I actually started to develop chronic pain just from being so unwell and previous health history that I'd endured. So it got to a point where I had like a kind of ongoing health journey and seeing different clinicians and specialists and no kind of outcome of how I could get better, and there was kind of there was no long-term plan for myself, and I wasn't working. I was socially isolating, and I kind of felt hopeless. I felt like there was no way out. So it just seemed like an option that would take the pain away at that time. I just thought that I couldn't go on living like the way that I was living, and it actually became quite an obsession to look up different ways and methods. It actually, I took some comfort in that, which sounds really strange, but at the time, it actually was quite comforting.
Yeah, that's a pretty common thing. I mean, I know in my experience when you become depressed and suicidal, the whole sort of, I think they call it ideation, suicidal ideation, really ramps up and you start thinking about it. So that must have been really hard. So you mentioned you went into a mental, like a healthcare facility, a mental health care facility. Um, how did you access that? Like, what was obviously you mentioned trying to take your own life. Was that the thing that got you into that? Like, what connected you to that sort of pathway?
Yeah, definitely the fact that I did try to take my own life. Then I was in an acute mental health ward in the hospital,
Mm,
and the plan was either to go public or private. But luckily, at that time, I went private,
mm.
um, and I didn't know how long I'd probably need for recovery. But I just had a week, and yeah, some of the it was a great experience, but also it was quite eye opening. It actually allowed me to put some of my own issues into perspective, seeing what other people were going through um, in hospital. So it really
You
opened my.
described you described it as a great experience. Could you expand on that?
I mean, with the psychologist in the hospital, kind of going through and talking about depression, giving worksheets, doing group therapy, actually hearing from other people about their experiences, actually it normalized what I was going through, and it made me feel safe. And at the time, I was so alone. So really, what I was seeking was some comfort, that I wasn't the only person going through this.
Ah. And was this the start? Would you say this is the start of your healing journey? And if so, how long do you think your whole journey took? And what were the steps that you had to take to get to, I guess, back to where you are now?
It's definitely a really long journey. I think the healing journey begins with gratitude, being grateful for wherever I was at that time, for the small moments in my life. Um, and I just had to start rebuilding. I got a casual job back at the hospital. I slowly worked up and got some more hours because my confidence was really tanked. So I had to start again, and then slowly starting to meet up with a friend once a week and trying to kind of get out of my comfort zone and make sure that I was drinking a lot of water, trying to eat healthy foods and get enough sunlight. And I really went back to the basics, and I didn't really set goals too high. I really set my goals really small, and a lot of self-compassion and self-talk that I can actually get through this. It won't always be like this. And over time, my situation started to change, and I with the continued professional support and help, I managed my symptoms and continued to do so.
That sounds like a great recovery story, and a lot of like small incremental steps. When you're taking those steps, what did you find worked well, and what didn't work well when you were recovering?
Putting too much pressure and expectation on myself, um, trying to do everything all at once. You know, sometimes you only have so much capacity. They say in the hospital, if you can make a cup of tea and go for a walk, like, you know, you've ticked off your to-do list. So, you know, when you're really not in a great space, you really have to strip it back and start small. So I just kept thinking about what they said in the hospital, just to really go slow and reach out, and actually started sharing a bit on social media how I was feeling. And I got some really comforting responses saying, you know, thanks for sharing your story, and I hope you're going okay. So I guess some of that really helped me as well, just to know
Mm,
that people had experienced what I experienced, so I didn't feel, you know, as alone. I really do think that social connection was the biggest contributor to my healing.
If you were to look back on your, like if you were to travel back in time to your past self, what's something that you would tell yourself in that moment when you were recovering?
Just keep going. It's going to get better.
Thanks for sharing, Ron.
You're welcome. I'd love to hear about your journey, and you'd share your story about what happened and what worked for you and what you've learned throughout this journey of yours.
Yeah, cool. Okay. My experience was relatively recent. It was only a couple of years ago. I was going through a period of sort of change in my life. I kind of felt a bit lost in my direction. I had, quit my job where I was working as a permanent sort of corporate job. And I'd gone traveling back to Mexico where I used to live and had taken this sort of like big journey to sort of like rediscover who I was and what was the purpose of my sort of life, I guess. And that trip was really amazing and I learned a lot about myself. But when I came back to Australia, I found myself sort of like having a hard time readjusting back to Australia. And I kind of felt lost and empty. And I was sort of convinced that I really needed to make a pretty radical change in my life. And I started off on this journey around like, changing where I was living, changing my job, changing my career. And basically what happened was, there was a series of events where I had made the decision to sell my apartment, right? Something that seems like a real kind of logical thing. Like I was living in this apartment in Collingwood, and I just had decided that that didn't really align with my future direction and that it would now be a good time for me to sell. And I would go and experiment living in the country and, sort of take these steps into this sort of new way of living that I wanted to experiment with. But as I was approaching this decision, I had really heightened anxiety. That kind of seems normal when you're doing that kind of period of change. But for me, it seemed pretty, I don't know, catastrophic level anxiety, right? And that peaked after I made the decision to sell my house. Right? So I made the decision to sell my house. I had some pretty clear plans about what I was going to do next, but I hadn't bought a house, and I started getting worried about whether I made the right decision, and my mind got stuck on whether I made the right decision or not. And I started not sleeping. So basically I would go to bed, I'd fall asleep, and I'd wake up at like 2 or 3 and I'd start freaking out about whether I made the right decision or not. And then through this period of not sleeping, a core fear of mine came up, which was sort of like the fear of total devastation. I grew up in a relatively poor family, and there's some underlying fears there around like, not having a home and living on the street and a couple other things. And for some reason, this decision triggered that fear. And I kind of went into this like OCD level thinking about that I had destroyed my life. And that started really piquing my anxiety, and I stopped sleeping. Basically, I sold the house. I then moved to a place in Castlemaine. And when I got there, I kind of thought everything was going to settle down, but it didn't. Everything started getting a lot worse. I would wake up at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning screaming. Like I was like screaming, having these panic attacks, and I just couldn't sleep at all. And it was like torture being alive. Like it was like absolute torture. I was still working at the time, but even like leaving the house, I would have a panic attack. I would be on a video call and I have waves of panic attacks. So like my body just went to this sort of like fight or flight panic attack kind of mode. And I wasn't sleeping. I was having somewhere between like probably 10 panic attacks a day. And my body was just totally run down. My mind was run down. I remember being so stressed, my beard had started falling out. And this wasn't a really long period of time from the time that I had decided to sell the house, selling the house and then living there. It was a couple of months, right? And then I was in this place for literally maybe about a week and everything started going really, really bad. And so my family were involved in the way that I was letting them know that my mental health wasn't going so well. And I had a psychologist I was seeing, I believe in, supporting my mental health. So I was still seeing the same psychologist. And I had all these support networks, but they weren't stopping the experience, right? The support network was helping me, but wasn't preventing from the experience I'm having. So I was still having this really terrifying experience. So as my panic attacks got worse, I was talking to my mom, and I was like, hey, I need some help. So my mom came down to help me, and she was there for a couple of days. And I was like, at this point, I was in suicidal ideation, right? So I knew that if I was going to be left alone, I was going to kill myself, right? That's where I was at on my journey. So it had gone from just having panic attacks to at night time to having various panic attacks throughout the day, like 10, 20 panic attacks a day at this point. I couldn't leave the house, and it was torture. And I was now thinking about how to kill myself. And I knew I wasn't safe alone. I tapped into like the mental health facilities around Castlemaine. And basically they were like, we can't get you into a public hospital for, I think it was like for a month or something like that.
And you just knew you couldn't, that was way too long.
Yeah, I just knew that. I remember sitting down and talking to the mental health care nurse, and I was there with my mom and the nurse, and the nurse, he said, this is going to take at least a month for you to get in to a healthcare facility. I'd be better to go into Melbourne, but I didn't have my family network there. And so, and my response was, I won't live that long. Right. Like, so my mom and my sister coordinated, my elder sister coordinated, and Rachel's the name, and Rachel came down and mom went back up, and then they came up with a plan to get me out of Castlemaine into a healthcare facility on the Gold Coast where they live. And so basically in a period of days, they worked out how to get me into this healthcare facility. Luckily for me, I had, base level cover, and with my particular company, like the company I go through for insurance, I was able to upgrade it to get into a private facility, and it's like a thing you could do. And so yeah, I went into a private facility. For me, my experience in the private facility was different to yours. It was like a drug and rehab facility. And the reason I was there wasn't necessarily to use the facility's services in terms of like the group therapy and stuff. It was more about to access a psychiatrist as fast as possible, so I could access, the medication and all that kind of stuff to help me sleep, and then use the existing support networks I had to help maintain my mental health. So I was in the facility for probably about a week as well. I found it really, really tough But the thing that was really good about it was I was able to access a psychiatrist fast, and that they were able to put me on medication, which stabilized my mood, and got me sleeping. I still found that my time in treatment in the facility was some of the hardest because everything had gone really, really fast, right? So I'd gone from living in this, living in my own place in Collingwood to living in Castlemaine in a nice house to then going to a psychiatric ward essentially, and being in a single bed in a room with like suicide proof showers and things like that, being checked up on every 2 hours to make sure I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't going to commit suicide. And then they would interrupt my sleep during the night, which was quite interesting to make sure I was still safe, right? So it was a really big shock. But I'm actually really grateful for that experience because it got me into the care I needed, to the supervision that I needed, because otherwise this would be a very different story.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was there for a week, and basically when I came out of that, I went to my mum's place, and that's where the rebuilding really started. So similar to your story, I'd lost all that whole experience. I totally destroyed all my confidence in myself. I was worried I wouldn't be able to work again, that I would lose all my friends, that I would actually lose everything I'd worked for. And yeah, it was terrifying, but I started really small, right? So my goals were sleep a full night. And then the next goal was sleep a full night, but don't sleep a full day. So don't sleep during the day.
Yeah.
Then sleep and then make myself breakfast.
Cool.
And then sleep, make myself breakfast, go for a walk. And literally really similar to your story about starting with those really small goals, go for a walk, and then my next goal would be I would stack and go for a run, and then go for a run 3 times a week. And I was still having panic attacks throughout the day, even though I was on medication, but it was a lot less. But I knew that I needed to start conditioning myself. I was so sensitive to like all stimulus. For example, like I couldn't watch TV. It was too much for me to take in. Everything was triggering. I remember watching Seinfeld one day with my family, and I couldn't sit through Seinfeld. I found it too triggering, right? So everything was like this hyper stimulation. So I kind of just had to go incrementally through the sort of like re-immersion into like society and like reintegration back with my friends. So like I would catch a train to go see my friend, and then I'd come back that day. Then eventually I got to the point where I would go to my friend's place, and I think I stayed for a weekend or a week or whatever to get used to being independent. And then it was this slow, gradual process. And look, to get to a point where I could get back, I could leave my mum's place, it was probably like about a month or 2. And then eventually I was able to move back to Melbourne. But that was still another long process of like, I was back in Melbourne, then I had to go through the process of like, okay, I'm in Melbourne. What's the next goal? What's the next goal? And so all these small goals.
Did you feel when you came back to Melbourne that you might have lost some of the progress that you were building on, like the momentum that you're building? Because again, it's another change of environment, or did you feel comfortable then to kind of re-enter back in to your, old life, so to speak, but with fresh eyes?
I didn't. I think I was more scared about regressing than it actually regressing, right? So like I was scared that I wouldn't be able to take the stress of moving away from my family and my support networks, and then and being able to cope, and then like finding a place to live again. Like I had to find rental and all that kind of stuff. So I was really worried that I wouldn't be able to handle the stress of it at all. And, you know, and at times I didn't, right? I think this is probably one of the things that anyone recovering from a mental health experience or episode needs to realize is that the path to healing isn't linear, right? It's these small, but well, it's these cycles, right? So like, you know, mine went from having 10 panic attacks a day to 5 panic attacks a day to 1, right? And then I'd have less panic attacks throughout the week. And then like small things would set me off initially, and then it'll be bigger things, right? And I remember like making the decision to sign the lease on a house that I was going to rent. And that was such like a huge like stress for me, because I was so scared. I questioned like my whole experience. I had lost the trust in my ability to make decisions, right? And making any decision was actually really hard and would trigger a panic for me, right? So, you know, a logical thing about like signing a lease for an apartment with a friend in a suburb I wanted to live in was huge. And like I had, you know, a panic attack about that. I had to go. I remember I was out with my friends and like, you know, I think we're in the park, and I had to go for a walk by a river and like lay down on the grass to sort of like earth and ground myself to be able to lower my heart rate enough to be able to like make a decision. And this is the process I had to go through with a lot of things.
Totally.
Yeah. So, I mean, and the total recovery journey for me, I think it's been about a year and a half. Yeah, about a year and a half to the episode to where I am now. And like, it's gone pretty fast in terms of the time, and my recovery has been pretty good. But I think one of the reasons my recovery has been good is because before the episode of the mental health breakdown and illness, I already knew the networks, right? I already had a psychologist. I already knew the mindset stuff.
How long have you seen a psychologist prior to this?
Oh, I've been seeing a psychologist for like 10 years, like prior to that, but for different reasons. And I think my engagement with the process wasn't as high as my engagement post the experience. But I think what really helped was like the mental conditioning that I'd done beforehand around like mindset and stuff like that. And I think one of the things, like those things, I think they reduce the risk of having a mental health episode, right? They don't necessarily stop it from happening for people. Like it still happened to me. I just didn't think it would. I thought, you know, with all the stuff, it wouldn't happen. But these things can just pop up at any point in time to anyone, right? It's like, it's an illness that does not discriminate. Like, and that's why it's a leading cause of death, right? So it's like, it's an illness that doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anyone at any point in time. And that's why it's so important for people to invest in their mental health. One, to reduce the risk of it happening. And two, if it does happen, to understand the pathway out. And like, I'm really grateful for like the fact that I've got amazing friends, amazing family, and that I'm in a point of, to call it out, I'm in a point of privilege where I had the resources at my, you know, at my fingertips to be able to get myself out of it. And a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Yeah, we know that the system's overburdened, public mental health system. There's wait lists. Not everyone gets admitted, you know, even if you've attempted. It's a, you know, mental health is increasing and the system's so burdened. So, you know, if you do have access to those resources and you have great support networks, definitely lean on it.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things that I found in my recovery is like, one, like you said what would you tell your past self, and I'd have a really similar message, right? Like, you're going to be okay, and you're going to get through this, and you can trust the people that you love and they love and who love you, right? Like, that's one of the core things I took away from this was I'm not alone, right? And like, even when I say that, it invokes a really emotional response to me. It's like, yeah, I'm not alone. And I think that's my message to other people experiencing this, is that you're not alone. It might feel like you are, but you're not. And there are people out there that can support you and will support you, your family, your loved ones. And there are services that you can access that will help you, and online services that are readily available. And we should definitely provide them in the link below. And I think the next message, or the next learning I got, was the power of gratitude. I think one of the most fundamental things, apart from being supported by my friends and family, that transformed me and my journey was gratitude. And just being grateful for those the common experience just walk past. Like, for me, it was like the feeling of like sand on my feet, or the smell of grass, or when I was at the coast, swimming in the ocean, the sound of waves. And like, these small things, me just practicing gratitude for those tiny things in my life that bring happiness. Now, like, my perspective on life is so much better. Like, there's so much stuff I used to just take for granted. And honestly, now I feel so blessed. I'm like, I get to wake up every morning. I get to see a sunrise, right? In the afternoon, I get to see the sunset. I get to hang out with my friends. I remember the first time I went to a gig after I got back down from the Gold Coast.
Yeah.
And I am so grateful that I get to hang out with my friends and go to the Tramway Hotel or whatever it was and listen to a band. And it was all these kind of like experiences that I just took for granted in my previous, almost my previous life, that now just seems so rich and so great. So I think the two things is like, you're not alone. You've got your friends and your family, and it might seem hard, but reaching out to them, you'll get support. And two, practicing gratitude will totally change your life. Yeah, it's been a journey, and now life's pretty good. Like, job's good. I bought a house in the suburbs, and got a garden, and go surfing on the weekends. And I've got awesome mates, and like, I've got everything I need. So it's all possible.
Awesome. So thanks so much for listening. We are session 1. If you are struggling with your mental health, or any loved ones that are, we're going to put some resources down below. So definitely reach out to those helplines online and via phone, and get the support that you need.
Thanks, Ron. All right. So the next episode, we'll be talking about the importance of self-acceptance and self-compassion, and how practicing self-acceptance and self-compassion can really change your life. So thanks for tuning in. Talk to you next time.
Awesome. See you, everyone. Thank you.